Hello, friends, and welcome into Talking Sports at Work. I am your host, Eric Persley, and this is not going to be a full length episode, I guess, today because I have seriously spent the first half hour of what would have been the show having to stop and having to and pull over and mess with this stupid friggin' app. I don't know why we can't have one show without some technical issues, but I guess that's just comes with the territory. I thought I had found a good app that was not going to give me as much technical problems as the other one that I had all those issues with, the one that I used to use. But man, now this one's doing it every bit as much. But anyway, I hope everyone had a fabulous weekend. I'm going to turn that off. Um, I had a good weekend, other than, the Vols, they lost, but we knew that was going to be a long shot at Georgia. That was going to be a tough one. The Titans, we're going to dive into all that. It's not all bad, in fact. And yeah, I won a lot of money. So, and by the way, I hope you guys are paying attention to my betting tips. I know the parlay that I had on the college football thing didn't work out because Tennessee didn't stay within 10, and I had BYU winning that one. But then it turned out after Tennessee lost, I started completely rooting for BYU to lose because now it's more important that the Vols move up in the rankings than anything else. If you're watching the YouTube channel, if you're paying attention to my social media, I had at least two shorts on there that I did that had some good bets. The Steelers, I had the money line that was plus 150. I won a lot on it, and I did a little short just saying that. Also had Arkansas. I know I talked about that on here and on the YouTube channel and everywhere. The Arkansas plus 14 or 13 and a half, I think it was. And I remember even saying, if it gets below 10, I don't know if I'm going to take it. And then they ended up, I think, losing by 10. But yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. And I'm not trying to just toot my own horn here, but I seriously hope you guys are paying attention to the betting tips. And we'll dive into some thoughts that I have on the Monday night game, as well as recapping Saturday's action and Sunday's action. I'm going to take a really quick break here, make sure everything's working the way that it should, and I'll be right back. All right, friends, I think we're in good shape now with the everything should be working, and I hope you can hear me. Hope everything sounds good. Um, so a lot happened this weekend. A lot happened in college football. A lot happened in the NFL. A lot of things, a lot of pictures are becoming clearer in the NFL. One thing in particular, and before we dive into the specifics of what happened, and this is something I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, is that everybody, I've heard, well, not everybody, but I've heard a lot of the media saying that the AFC is kind of down this year, and that there are better teams in the NFC. And I think I think even everybody would agree there are probably still more good teams right now in the AFC, but it felt like the elite teams, or that's what they were saying, were maybe in the NFC. But I've been saying I don't think that's the case. I think you guys just aren't paying attention to the right teams. And now I guarantee you that's going to change because two teams that no one has really been paying enough attention to, but I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, I think might be real contenders, are Pittsburgh and the Chargers. Now they're going to start getting the attention that they deserve. The AFC is not really down. In fact, I think there are six teams in the AFC that I could totally see making it to and even winning the Super Bowl, even though Detroit looks like a juggernaut right now. And good for them. I'm very, very happy. I think, as a whole, I think football fans are happy to see Detroit doing so well, except, unless maybe you're a fan of another NFC North team. But overall, I think we're just happy to see a team that has for so long just been either irrelevant or bad, be the best team in the NFL, which they are right now. Excuse me. But if you look at the AFC, I mean, I really think there are at least five teams, maybe six that could make the Super Bowl because you've got the Chiefs. Even though the Bills, maybe showed some of the weaknesses, some of the flaws that are there, or some of the things that we already knew. They were just better able to exploit those flaws. But obviously the Chiefs, Buffalo. is one, obviously. Baltimore, although, I tend to hesitate on believing in them and believing in Lamar in the postseason until they do it. Um, but they're as good as anybody. But then two teams that I've been saying people need to start paying attention to, the Pittsburgh Steelers, for one. And they showed by beating the Ravens in what was the marquee game in the probably of the weekend in the NFL. Um, they beat the Ravens, and look, the way that that team is built, just like the other team I'm going to mention, the Chargers, they are that kind of team that's built to win in January. They have an outstanding defense. They have an outstanding coach. They want to run the ball and sort of play that sort of old school football that we know normally wins in the playoffs, and that's running the ball, playing great defense, being great situationally. Um, and that's what the Steelers are. And now with a quarterback who is a Super Bowl winning quarterback, who's still clearly got plenty left in the tank, the Charger, or excuse me, the Steelers, I think are a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I think the only thing that they are missing is it feels like they maybe don't have enough weapons in the passing game just yet, because outside of Pickens and Freiermuth, really who do they have in the passing game? Um, and so that's something that, might hold them back. But right now, I mean, they showed they can beat Baltimore, even though, well, I don't know what's going on with Justin Tucker. I mean, you can point to that and say that maybe the Ravens should have won. You've got historically the best kicker of all time, and he's missing all those kicks. I don't know what was going on with him there. But the Steelers, the way they are built, I think they are a legit contender. The only flaw there, it feels like, is a sort of lack of weapons. But an experienced quarterback like Russell Wilson can maybe help cover some of that and minimize the mistakes. And then the other team that is similar are the Chargers. And you guys know I've always been a huge Justin Herbert fan, and I'm so happy to see him now with a really good coach, a guy who, obviously more than believes in him and loves him. And talks about him all the time. And it's really great to see him now. I think being able to be recognized. I think we'll start again talking about Justin Herbert as being in that upper echelon of quarterbacks, because we kind of forgot about him, or at least the national media did for a while, because the Chargers just weren't up there, competing in the way that the Chiefs were and the Bills were and the Ravens were. And so Justin Herbert was sort of forgotten about to some degree in that group of elite AFC quarterbacks. Um, but now look at what the Chargers have. They are excellent on defense. They want to run the ball, just like I was talking about with Pittsburgh. I mean, that's, Harbaugh's MO. They've got one of the best offensive lines in the game, and they've got an elite top five quarterback. Which is something that Pittsburgh really doesn't have. Even though Russell Wilson's good, he's not that, guy that he was there for a few years where he was, an MVP candidate. But he's still got plenty left, and he still can win with a really good team like they have around him. But the Chargers have a guy that can carry them at the quarterback position, and that's something that only a handful of other teams have. Um, so you've got, the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, and then I think people are now going to start talking about the Steelers and the Chargers right up there. Um, After winning, even though Cincinnati is, a whole conversation and a whole episode probably unto themselves. We know what they can be, and the Chargers just pretty much handled them on national TV in the primetime spot. And so then the sixth team that I would say is still on the bubble, and we can't forget about just yet, is Houston. The thing that's concerning with them is they just seem like two totally different teams on the road versus at home. At home, they're incredible and a Super Bowl contender. On the road, they struggle. So let's see what they do, and that maybe is a good segue into the Monday night game, because actually, let me take a quick break and then we'll talk about that a little bit really quick. All right. Hey, friends. Excuse me. So, um, in the Monday night game, we've got Houston at Dallas, and Houston is a 7-point favorite, or they were the last time I looked at it. which I guess was this morning. That, seems about right, and that would be a line where you would, just common say, just on the surface it would feel like you should take Houston, but I don't know, man. I mean, it's at Dallas. This is sort of one of those inter-conference rivalry games, in-state sort of rivalry game. And it just feels like, I don't know, this feels like one that could be a sort of Houston slip up. Um, just because, again, they're so different. And CJ Stroud specifically is so much better at home versus on the road. If Dak Prescott was not, out, I would say take Dallas. Cooper Rush, we know, can win games, though. Um, he did it, was it last year or year before last when Dak missed a big chunk of games there? But and they kept winning with Cooper Rush. I can't remember, but he can win games for them. But Dallas is already just such a mess, and I this is one that I don't know. I know I was just tooting my own horn about my betting tips and everything. I don't know which way I'm going to go on this one. Honestly, there's a boosted thing on Hard Rock now, which they do the best ones of those. Like a lot of every one of these platforms does these boosted bets, but if you'll actually look at them, like Caesars, for example, Caesars does a lot of I'm doing air quotes boosted bets. But if you actually do that bet on, say, ESPN, it's the same odds. It's not actually boosted to anything. But Hard Rock, on the other hand, actually does some that are not only boosted significantly, but they're also not bad bets. Like one from last night that I won on was the Chargers to win and Justin Herbert to throw 2 touchdowns. And that was boosted to like plus 200 something. Um, and then there's one tonight that is the Texans to win by 10 that I might take just because it feels like that's as likely as anything. Um, this one is just one that it feels tricky to me. Um, so do with that what you will. Obviously, again, Houston should win. They are the better team, but they struggle on the road. And Dallas is going to come out. This is going to be a meaningful game for them, I think, given that it's an in-state sort of rival and it's an opportunity for them to kind of play spoiler a little bit. They know that they're not really playing for much this year, so when they have an opportunity to, motivate themselves in a game that can be meaningful, you expect them to probably, play pretty well in it. So this is one I don't know. Maybe look at some player props. I wish I would have had a chance to do that before I started talking, but I didn't. Um, but I might do that Houston to win by 10 thing just because that feels as likely as anything. But this is a game that's definitely going to be worth watching, even though, Dallas is not good this year, and even though they don't have their quarterback, this is one that I'm going to be paying special attention to because again, I want to see what Houston. Keep wanting to see what Houston is. They are that team for me in the AFC that's still sort of on the bubble. Early in the season, it felt like they were a legit Super Bowl contender, but they have struggled for the last few weeks, really ever since that loss at the Jets, which I lost some money on. um, they've sort of been up and down a little bit. So I'll be interested to see how that one goes. Now I'm going to take a quick break and we'll dive into some of the Tennessee football stuff. Okie dokie, welcome back. So, um, in college football last weekend, we really only had one big upset that I that was, that I can remember, at least in the top 10. And it was BYU, even though, maybe a lot of people had Kansas winning that game. That's why that line was so sort of stinky the way it was, where an undefeated team is only a 2.5 point favorite at home against a team that at that point only won like 3 games. But that was one that for whatever reason, a lot of people had BYU losing. I didn't put much on that, but I put it in with a parlay that I had, which, I had mentioned on the podcast, which Tennessee plus 10, 10.5, and then Arkansas plus 14.5, and then BYU to win. So, two of those ended up losing, but I didn't put much on that one individually. I did put a good chunk on Arkansas. Um, But that was really, I think, the only big upset, at least in the top 10, because, Tennessee, even though we were ranked higher going into Georgia, that was always going to be a tall task. But BYU losing does help us. And the AP poll came out yesterday, and I was pleasantly surprised with it. It was right about what I thought it would be. Now, what's interesting about it is if you look at the poll, let's see. Ole Miss, we are ranked three spots behind a team that we beat, a team with the same record. Uh, Ole Miss is ranked one spot behind a team that they beat, a team with the same record. And the team that's leading the pack of those of the two lost SEC teams is the team that lost to Vanderbilt. So, that was one that I don't know how you figure out the order of those teams. I was a little bit I was a little bit surprised, but I don't know how you figure out that order. Um, Bear with me just one moment. Actually, let me take one more break. I gotta do something, and I'll be right. Okay, friend. Sorry about that. I had a work related thing. Had to pull over for a second. But yeah, I don't know how you would work out the order of that. I mean, the way they did it makes as much sense as anything because we beat Alabama. Alabama beat Georgia. Georgia beat Texas, who's way up there, but they only have one loss. Ole Miss beat Georgia. Um, Alabama beat Georgia. So yeah, I don't know that order makes as much sense as anything, I guess. Um, Now, as far as the game itself goes, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because, like I said, it was going to be a tall task to go into Georgia with them coming off of a loss. I wish we would have played better in the second half. I hate that we ended up losing by two touchdowns. But again, it's what I keep saying is let's not let's not get too high or too low with any of this. And let's not forget this is only Josh Heupel's fourth year. And let's not forget where this program was 4 years ago. I mean, it was as far in the toilet as you can get. It was worse than what Florida State is right now. At least Florida State still has, their roster mostly intact and what we thought was a good coach. I mean, we were having NCAA sanctions coming down on us. We had a mass exodus of all of our best players from Henry Toto to what was that? What was our left? Wanye Morris, Eric Gray. I mean, a mass exodus of talent. The roster was, totally bereft of talent, and our coach had just had a scandal and gotten fired, who was an underperforming coach already. um, I mean, this program was in the toilet. And the fact that he's turned things around as quickly as he has, I think we can't lose appreciation for that. And the other part of that is let's just hang on to these receipts from all these Georgia people talking shit right now because again, this is taking time to rebuild this program. This is Josh Heupel's fourth year, so it's mostly his recruits now. But this is, his first recruiting class. It was going to be a very hard sale, and so I don't remember what we were ranked, but it wasn't a great recruiting class. But he's always been this team since he's taken over has been great at finding like the gems like the three-star gem, diamond in the rough type players. And he's been great at working the transfer portal. And let's not forget, I mean, Hendon Hooker was a transfer, Joe Milton was a transfer. But now, that we're getting these top 10 recruiting classes consistently. And now that these players are starting to mature, let's not forget also, Nico's only a redshirt freshman. We've got the number one player in the country going to be coming in not next year's class, but the year after that. So, this was something that was going to take time to rebuild. That second year, we really overperformed, largely because of Hendon Hooker and some surprises. But, this is right about where we should be with a really good new coach in his fourth year. Winning 10 games, competing for the SEC, and competing, should be getting into the 12-team playoff. So, but we're still getting better, is what I'm saying. It was something that, I think a lot of people, we didn't really know how to look at it because everybody wants to be Georgia, and Kirby came around and kind of made them a powerhouse so quickly. But it feels more like that's the exception, especially for a team. Georgia was already really good. I was surprised they fired Mark Richt. I felt like that was, he was a good coach for them. And so Georgia was already a good team, and Kirby came in and made them a great team pretty quickly. We were a terrible team that had not been good for a decade when Josh Heupel took over. So this is just something that is still taking time. And we're going to have Georgia at home next year. I'm telling you, I don't care what the line is. I don't care what things look at like. I wish I could bet on that right now because I'm taking Tennessee. And so, again, we're still getting better. This is exactly, in fact, where you would want us to be in our head coach's fourth year, winning 10 games and, having a chance to at least compete for the national championship. This is good. So let's not get too high. Let's not get too low. And let's remember that this is still a process and that we're still getting better from one year to the next. Now, as far as the game itself goes, yes, I know everybody's going to bitch about the officials, and they have more than enough right to. I mean, but what I've said, and I said this on my little short post that I did on YouTube and on TikTok, is that's not the reason why we lost. I mean, yes, that bullshit face mask gave them that drive that we had pretty much stopped and had them backed up in their own end zone, and that was the drive where they scored the go ahead touchdown. And yes, I don't know how in the hell they can go and review a 5 yard, 12-man penalty, but you can't go and review a 15-yard personal foul. Now, that's not on the officials because that's the rules. But I've said all along, this is something that if they're going to review penalties, and I talked about earlier that or in a podcast a week or so ago, that it felt like there was one penalty that they could review, and I couldn't remember what it was. It turns out that's what it is. It's 12 men on the field. But why can't, if anything, I think you should be able to review personal fouls, right? I mean, that's the one that it makes sense that you should be able to review these 15-yard penalties. But anyway, that's not in the rules, so that's not on the officials. But some of the stuff like, a fumble that was called not a fumble, and some just a lot of calls went Georgia's way, and that's to be expected to some degree in a big game on the that the home team's going to get a lot of those calls. That's the way it goes, and that's not the reason that we lost that game. Georgia was the better team. That was the best game Carson Beck has played all year. That was probably the most complete game Georgia has played as a team all year, and that includes that big win over Texas. Um, that was the Georgia team that everybody was kind of expecting when this year started. And so far, we've really only seen glimpses of that team against Clemson and a glimpse again against Texas. And now it feels like they've really put it together right when they're playing Tennessee. That was the Georgia team that can win a national championship. So that's why we lost that. They were the better team at home. And yeah, that's all there is to it. Um, Now, moving on from that, I don't even know what our chances are for the SEC championship because, and you guys remember, hopefully you remember, I have been saying now for several weeks that at least one, maybe two lost teams are going to be playing in the SEC championship. And I was saying that because I thought there was still a chance that Texas might lose to Arkansas or that they will lose to A&M. But even if they win all those games, there's still going to be one two-loss team in. And if they lose to A&M, then and if A&M doesn't lose anymore, then they would be only one loss, so they would be in. So that game most likely, is going to be for a spot in the SEC championship. But the opponent is going to be one of these group of two lost teams that includes Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, and as I mentioned earlier, it's all mixed up as to who's beaten who. And Texas has Texas A&M has two losses overall, but right now they only have one conference loss. So if they lose to Texas, they would be in that group. And I don't know who they've played and haven't played, but yeah, this tiebreaker scenario is going to get crazy. And I remember a long time ago, back when Fulmer was still there, where we had a scenario where Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida all had the same record. We had beaten Georgia. Georgia had beaten Florida, and Florida had beaten us. And because of some crazy tiebreaker stuff, we ended up in the SEC championship game. I think that one was against LSU. We didn't end up winning. That might have been like '07. I think that was the last time we were in the SEC championship. But Tennessee should still have a chance of making it, right? I mean, I don't know. If it comes down to like strength of record or strength of wins, then you got to think Georgia's right up there. Alabama might be the highest ranked of those teams right now, but they lost to Vanderbilt. Let's not forget that. And this is not, your grandpa's Vandy, of course, but that's an unranked team. Tennessee has a loss against an unranked team in Arkansas. So I don't know, but somebody's going to be playing in Atlanta. Most likely, it's going to be either Texas or Texas A&M, and it could be both of them, depending on how the whole tiebreaker thing. But most likely, it's going to be one of them versus who knows at this point. We know that LSU has now been eliminated from that conversation. With the loss against Florida, and that was another interesting result. Actually, I guess that was another upset from the weekend. And that was one that I was saying on the podcast last week is like sort of I'm staying away from. I'm interested in. I want to see it, but like LSU was a 3.5 point favorite on the road at Florida. Florida had seemed like they had gotten on track, but then they got destroyed by was it Texas? Yeah, Texas. I think last week. Um, but anyway, right now with the way things look, I'm hoping that the CFP committee follows closely what the AP poll is. And honestly, I put more stock into the AP poll anyway for what that's worth because I've said all along I think that the journalists who this is their lives are dedicated to this, those people are more qualified to make these rankings than a group of 12 individuals, many of whom are not even involved in football anymore, many of whom have never been directly involved in football. I mean, you've got athletic directors, and you've got there's one. I looked it up actually. There was one former sports journalist on the committee. You had a couple of former coaches from teams that no name coaches basically, and a bunch of athletic directors and university people. People who, in the end, are it feels to me less qualified than uh, people who have dedicated their lives to this in sports media, or the coaches and their poll, who obviously know as more than anyone. Um, and you guys know, if you've listened to any of my podcasts, I hate the committee system. I think we never should have done that. And I have said many, many times, nobody has any reason to bitch about this if you were one of the people bitching about the BCS, because that was a scientific system that took the AP poll, that took the coaches poll, and that factored in all the strength of schedule, strength of record, and all the other things. And it was a scientific analytical system, but nobody liked that at the time. They wanted to take that out. They wanted to throw subjectivity in it. That's what the eye test was. That's what that eye test everybody wanted to talk about was. So you don't have any room to bitch about it now if you wanted rid of the BCS, because this is what you guys wanted, is a subjective group of people who don't even seem qualified making these calls. Now, for Tennessee specifically, ESPN still gives us a 66% chance of making the playoff. That's after the loss at Georgia. And that's very, very encouraging because ESPN basically owns college football now. And they're the ones who, as far as I know, are basically over this committee. I mean, the college football playoff is a Disney owned thing. So if ESPN's saying it, then I think we've got a really good chance. excuse me, but I've given up completely on trying to figure out the logic, if you even want to call it that, that goes into this committee's decision making process. But I would think that after all the sort of outcry and the how so many big time media people were loudly questioning these rankings, I think that the committee probably heard that and will adjust and put these two loss SEC teams a little higher than they had them before. Because that's the big gripe is that, are you really telling me that Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss is not as good as Penn State, or is not there that any of these teams wouldn't beat Indiana or BYU? Now, again, with Indiana, BYU, I got it because they were undefeated, it made sense. But if you're really using the eye test as supposed to be one of your big criterion, then you should still put those two lost SEC teams ahead of any of them. Um, but again, I'm hoping that they follow pretty closely along with what the AP poll looks like. But hell, they may have Boise State ahead of us. I don't know. But that was what I was worried about, and was encouraged to see when I saw the AP poll come out that we're still right there in that group of two loss SEC teams, even though we're at the bottom of it right now. I'm glad that there wasn't anyone else ahead of us. And I hope that that's what the CFP committee does as well, but I'm not even going to try to predict what they're going to do. Um, anyway, those are my main thoughts on the Vols, and I'm running out of time, and I wanted to get some Titan stuff, so I'm going to take another quick break, and I'll be right. All right, friends, just really quickly, I wanted to take a minute because I actually stopped to look at some information. I kind of avoided looking at some of this because I kind of part of me didn't want to know, and just you don't want to put too much. You don't want to start looking at the schedule and trying to pick wins and losses, but because college football in particular is so unpredictable. But I was looking. I went ahead while I had a minute and I looked at the teams that are in and around us, and honestly, there will be some upsets still. I mean, because that's just the way it goes. But if you look at the schedule of that cluster of SEC teams, Alabama should not lose anymore. I mean, the only real game they have left is Auburn. And let's see, is that, uh, or wait, no, excuse me. They play at Oklahoma. So that's not a gimme. But then they have, Auburn at home. And with the way Alabama's kind of been up and down, that Iron Bowl game can be crazy. So, and then at Oklahoma is also not a gimme, but they should be. You expect them to win both of those. And Ole Miss, they are at Florida at the Swamp this next week. That's an opportunity where we could hopefully move up. So I'm going to be again, weirdly rooting for Florida, which has happened a couple of times this season, and that feels so strange to me. But then after that, if they win at Florida, all they've got left is hosting Mississippi State, and that's as close to a gimme as you get in the SEC this year. Um, and then Georgia, I don't remember who they play. They don't have any more SEC games left, and I think they play like a cupcake and Georgia Tech maybe, so they shouldn't lose anymore. And then outside of those SEC teams, I started looking. Notre Dame has what's actually a pretty big game against Army next week. And then after that, they are at USC. So those are two games that, could give us an opportunity to hopefully move up, but games that Notre Dame should be expected to win. Also, another team that's right there around us is Miami. They are hosting Wake Forest and then at Syracuse. So, I mean, they shouldn't lose either of those. But if either of those games are even close, then you got to think that, they will be behind us in the rankings, even with one loss. Um, and then Boise State was another one I was thinking about because the CFP committee could have them ahead of us. They are at Wyoming and then hosting Oregon State. So, you got to think those would be two wins. So really, the the teams that are around us, and I've already talked about, all the stuff with the Penn State's got one of the easiest schedules you'll ever see. They should not lose anymore. Texas has the easiest SEC schedule I think I've ever seen. But then they have A&M at the end of the season, which is going to be for the SEC championship. I think probably the best case scenario for us there is that Texas wins, and doesn't give, because if A&M beats Texas there, then now, they're still going to keep Texas ahead of us, but they're probably going to jump A&M into that cluster of two-loss SEC teams where they're currently a few spots behind. Um, so that's one that could be a very big deal for Tennessee in the end. And then you've got the conference championship games where, could Clemson still make the ACC championship and then, jump everybody? Could a Colorado win the Big 12 and jump everybody? So you've got these situations. So, again, and that's why, like I said, I usually don't want to go into the schedules and start picking wins and losses and trying to predict because you never know. But there are still a lot of crazy things that could happen. I've said all along that, I imagine that the 12th ranked team and maybe even the 11th ranked team will probably be left out, because of how things will go in these conference championship games. But that's why I'm hoping for more of these teams to lose just so we can have a little bit more security. I hope Ole Miss loses at Florida, even though that's unlikely. That would bump us ahead of them. I hope Notre Dame loses one of those games so we can bump ahead of them, just to give us some more security. And one last thought on this is something I've said before as well. People said when they expanded the playoffs that part of the reason they were doing that was so there wouldn't be, the teams bitching about that, bitching about being left out. But I said all along, no, that's just going to make that worse because now there are going to be even more teams that feel that they have a claim to be in. When it's only the top four, then, you've only got maybe one or two teams that have a legit case that they should have been in. But now with a 12 team field, I mean, you're going to have 16, 18, 20 teams that could make a case that they should be in. So I never saw this as a fix for, you know, having fewer teams feel left out. I mean, that doesn't make sense at all. But I'm not saying that this is a bad idea. I love the 12 team thing, and I'm glad that they did it. But that was just a little thought there. And I hope that we don't end up one of those teams on the outside looking in and bitching about not about being left out this year. Although right now, you know, after that Georgia loss, that's not unlikely. Um, especially like how many SEC teams are they going to want to put in? Because again, you look at Texas, Alabama, Georgia. Right now, those three feel like they're almost locks to be in, assuming they don't lose any more games. Ole Miss is about as close to it probably should be in that group as well of almost a lock to be in. And then you've got Tennessee. Now that's five. I think they would be fine with putting five SEC teams in. But what if Texas A&M wins the SEC, or what if they just beat Texas in the regular season? Then that's going to be a sixth team that has a claim. So yeah, it's going to get really, really interesting. I wish that we could have just beaten Georgia, obviously, but hey, uh, and again, we don't need to overlook Vanderbilt. I mean, that would be the absolute worst case scenario this year. But it does look like we are going to have another 10-win season, which will be Josh Heupel's second in 4 years after taking over a program that was in the toilet. And we are still getting better. I mean, each year, our recruiting class, I think, has been ranked higher than the year before. So now I don't know that that's exactly the case, but it's been about that. Like maybe we had, but I think so. I mean, yeah, his first recruiting class was in the 20s, maybe, and then the next year was in the teens, and then the next year it was, lower teens. Next year, this year I think we're sitting at seventh. Next year's recruiting class is already looking outstanding, or the following year, the 2026 class, with the number one overall recruit in Faison Brandon, as well as the number one was it receiver? There was another five-star player, like top. 3-4 player that is right now projected to go to Tennessee. So we're still getting better. So even if we don't make the SEC championship or make the national championship this year, this is still a good year for Tennessee, and we're still getting better. I'm going to take one more quick break and then have a few minutes, hopefully, to talk about. Alrighty, friends, welcome back. So my Titans thoughts can probably be summed up relatively quickly since I don't have a lot of time, and that is that for 2 straight weeks now, Will Levis has looked really good, and the defense, the special teams, the offensive line, and the coaching have let him down. And that's really going to make us in sort of a put us in sort of a confusing spot, I think, for if that trend continues, which honestly I hope it does, or not the rest of it, but I hope he continues to look like this. I mean, there's reason to believe that after having been essentially benched for a few weeks. I mean, we know it was, the quote shoulder injury, but he came back and played the following game after that. So I think he could have played, but it was good for him to take a step back, take a few games off, see, have all that pressure taken off of him, see how a veteran like Mason Rudolph does things. And ever since he's come back, he's been really good. I mean, he just has. And the penalties have continued to rack up, which you guys have heard me say. It's harder to gauge a coach's performance than it is a player, but there are some indicators. Penalties, especially stupid pre-snap penalties, are a big indicator of coaching issues. We had, what was it, 2 touchdowns? I know there were one touchdown at least and one really big play that would have led to a touchdown, but I think it actually might have been 2 touchdowns and another big play that were called back by stupid penalties. Two of them were stupid pre snap illegal formation penalties on the same player who shouldn't have even been in the game. On that right tackle, that was a practice squad guy, which just goes to show how awful Nick Petit Frere is, I guess. But this point of emphasis all season that we've seen is having tackles lined up too far back. And we have 2 touchdowns called back because of that. And then the kick coverage. Again, we didn't allow, any huge ones, but you saw just bad tackling, good field position because of kick coverage. Um, and the defense for the second week in a row has been disappointing. And that's been something that we had been able to count on. So I don't know why we can't seem to put it all together. But of course, the best thing for us now is to keep losing games and the quarterback to keep looking better. So I guess in the end, this is a good thing, but it does make you worry about the coach. And I still like Brian Callahan. I'm not saying by any stretch that we should get rid of him, and I definitely don't think the Titans would get rid of him after one year. But it's concerning to see all these penalties, to see them not covering kicks, to see us kind of getting out toughed, to out physical at the line of scrimmage. I mean, the left side of this offensive line should be one of the best in the league for years with Latham and Skoronski and Cushenberry in the center. The right side sucks, but if you've only got one real big, really weak link on the offensive line, which would be that right tackle spot, they shouldn't be giving up this much pressure. So it's not just on them, or it's not just on that side. I mean, there are lots of problems with the Titans right now, but the quarterback is not one of them, which is the complete opposite of how it was for the first several games of the season. Um, the other thought that I wanted to do really quick or mention really quickly is how is this going to, what are we going to do now? What are we thinking draft wise if this does continue? If Will Levis does continue to look really good, which again, that's what I'm hoping for. Um, you know, uh, we could be looking at Travis Hunter. Although, and this is just something really quickly that I don't even know if I have enough time to go into, but I don't know how much I love Travis Hunter as a prospect. I think he's probably a better corner than a receiver, but he reminds me as a prospect, and this is weird, but he reminds me of what I thought about Darren McFadden when he was coming out. Because I remember he was just so unstoppable in college, but he was doing things that really aren't going to be the case in the NFL. Like right now, Travis Hunter is always going to be the best athlete on the field. That's not going to be the case when he gets into the NFL. Back then, Darren Patton was always the biggest, strongest, fastest dude out there. That was not the case when he got to the NFL. Now, I'm not saying Travis Hunter's not going to be a good player in the league, but I think he probably, as most people do, I think he probably translates better as a corner. And that's an area where, that's one area where we really don't need much with L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie and Roger McCreary. So if we do end up with the number one or even number two pick, and um, Will Levis continues to play like this, I would say let's trade back and rack up some more picks to build to fix that offensive line, fix that receiving core, fix the defensive front and the linebackers. I mean, there are going to be options for us. So anyway, but and again, I'm not saying I don't like. I do think Travis Hunter is going to be a better NFL player than Darren McFadden was, but he just kind of reminded me of him whenever I was thinking about this last night. It reminded me of that sort of situation, I guess. Anyway, I got to get to work. I hope everyone had a fantastic weekend. I hope you have a fantastic week. Let's watch it. Monday Night Football. We'll see what happens in the battle for Texas tonight. And hey, check out the YouTube channel if you haven't. Check me out on the social medias. It's at HDW personally on most of them. YouTube is Talking Sports at Work. There's more stuff on there usually than there is here because I'm able to just pop in really quickly, and I've started doing these little shorts and these 60-second thoughts, and a lot of them have to do with betting, and a lot of them have been hitting lately. So anyway, hope you guys have a great week. I'll talk to you again soon. Love you. Bye.